State policies, particularly in New York, are so skewed towards environmental protection that the future of many of these economies and these communities is in jeopardy. In fact, you just saw the NFC report. Here's what it tells you about the economic climate that we're trying to revitalize. There's high taxes, there's high energy costs, high transportation costs, a shrinking population, fewer middle-class residents, fewer young people, a regulatory climate that encourages red tape, scattered cell service, little broadband infrastructure, lower wages, low educational levels, fewer good-paying jobs. How do you encourage creativity and business in general when you have all of those challenges to overcome? We've had decades now where there has been no genuine balanced effort to sustain this region's economy. And I'll give you two examples in New York. I checked with the APA, I checked with Empire State Development, and I even checked with the Rockefeller Institute. The last analysis that I was able to find of the park's economic performance was in 1994. 1994. A lot has changed since 1994. My guess is that the APA can provide far more recent studies on environmental trends. If we know more about the environmental trends and next to nothing about the modern economic trends, that tells me our focus is skewed. Second, I believe the APA has 65 employees. Just one is dedicated to economic development. I like Steve Urban. I know Steve's here. He does a great job working with businesses and economic developers, but he's outnumbered 64-1. To businesses, this sends a clear message that this is a regulatory environment first and foremost. Because we have no modern economic data, it's hard to do more than talk about what we perceive is happening in the economy. Earlier this year, we had a meeting with chambers that represent districts throughout the Adirondack Park. To a person, they suggested that the perception is that the APA is anti-business. But I'd like to be positive and talk about what we can do about this situation. Creating economic growth is not rocket science to those of us in the chamber community. As I read this report, and with all due respect to Rob and Joe, I did question whether the goal was to launch a practical discussion or an ivory tower debate. You read the call in their report for an environment of innovation and incubators. But the reality is this is an area with no broadband infrastructure. You read about creating communities with a strong creative class, even while acknowledging that our young people and middle class is fleeing these areas. So I'd suggest we talk about specific steps that are practical, that would actually help those businesses and working families that are actually living in the Adirondacks and the Northern Forests. I believe it's economic planning versus reacting to plans that we need to transition to. Our chamber earlier this year suggested that if the APA were serious about balancing economic growth and environmental protection, that they'd have a master plan for economic development. To create a master plan for economic development, the first step would be to do a proper analysis of the current economic conditions and commit to annual reviews so that we know how many jobs were lost or created, how many new businesses were started, is payroll increasing or decreasing, are wages increasing or decreasing, what's the unemployment rate, and how does that compare to the rest of the state or the country. We need a commitment by state leaders right now to do this, and perhaps the Rockefeller Institute can help. We need a proactive plan. Let's use cell phones as an example. The need to have cell phone service today is crucial. Tourists expect to stay in touch with their families and workers travel. How many meetings do you go to, like today, where they tell you to turn off your cell phones? We carry them everywhere. Even if you don't want to stay in touch with the office or home, you feel safer knowing that you can use your cell phone if your car goes off the road. The APA has told us that they've approved every cell phone tower request when a completed application has been filed. That may be true, but approving projects is not a plan. Within the Northern Forest, let's use advanced GIS capabilities to map out where you need to put cell towers to provide service and develop a plan that pre-approves those suitable sites. This may help with broadband too. Chances are you've seen the commercials about wireless access cards. One guy is racing Michael Phelps outside of the pool on the internet. Another woman tries to leave a coffee shop but is jailed only to be rescued by Verizon who hands her a card through the bars. Internet access through our cell phones and for our computers via these access cards is a standard service offering today. A plan for cell phone access, therefore, is a step forward towards meeting the need for high-speed internet access throughout the northern forest. Adam Smith once said about the economy, to win, first you must not lose. Well, here's a recipe on how we can win with economic development. A simple way to promote tourism is to put up signs that direct travelers on our existing road system to get to the local businesses that have survived. While it might be fun to proclaim that a unique store or restaurant in a rural area is the best kept secret in that community, chances are that this is not a good business plan for their survival. But we're told that commercial directional signs are a blight and an eyesore. I'd suggest the boarded up and empty storefront in a village is genuine blight. I'd suggest that the rundown building that once housed a nice local restaurant or a motel is the real eyesore. State leaders in New York and perhaps the other states need to work right now with local chambers and business associations to plan where these signs should go, what they should look like, who will build them, who will install them, and by when. If we're serious about helping boost tourism, this should be a priority, and state leaders should assign someone on their staff to get this done. Please note, I'm not suggesting we go through a regulatory process to simply change the sign rules. I'm saying get signs up before more businesses leave this region. Renewable energy, we saw that we want to harness the possibilities of renewable energy. Once again, we need a plan. This report talks about wind power, the NFC report. We have a local company that wants to build a small wind farm on industrial property with existing roads and transmission lines. I know they don't necessarily feel this way, but I do. It may eventually take an act of Congress for this project to move forward. Once again, a plan for this type of economic activity makes the most sense. Determine through wind tests the ideal locations for such development. Proactively evaluate if such areas have existing roads, transmission lines, and prior uses that appear compatible, and designate them for such activities. Do the same with solar, woody biomass, water, etc. Do this throughout the northern forest. Evaluate whether developers actually locate there. That's your renewable energy initiative. Placemaking. In New York City, there is an organization called... I had an aha moment when I read through this report. Even if we develop a master plan for economic development, take some of these small actions I've suggested, I'm not sure that will be enough. The reason I say this is it appears to me that there is a political challenge to the future of these communities that might supersede all other efforts. So I will return and conclude with the notion that public policy decisions have been skewed in one direction. Why has this been the case? I think I found the answer on page 21. It talks about the fact that the entire region has seen a transition from large corporations as economic engines to smaller firms, and I think we all agree that's happening. I'd be willing to bet that when these large corporations were dominant, that they had the ear of the public policy makers. I bet that they had a certain amount of influence to get the public policy decisions at the local, state, and national level that they needed to survive. As these corporations left the forest, the voice of business became fragmented. While the voice of business fragmented, we saw the rise of the environmental movement. This movement resulted in the creation of powerful, well-funded, professionally run organizations pushing for environmental protection to the exclusion of everything else. It is these environmental organizations in the northern forests that now have the financial and professional capability to influence public policy. Google any local news article about an APA decision recently, and chances are you'll also see a comment from a paid communications director speaking on behalf of one of these organizations, and they're usually applauding the APA's actions. No doubt that professionally organized, well-funded, and politically active interest groups will inevitably dominate public policy, especially here in New York. That is part of our democracy, whether you like it or not. This is especially true if there's no organized counterbalance. In the northern forest, the business lobby is fragmented. I'll admit that. We're not in Washington, Albany, at every APA meeting, but the environmental lobby is at each of these tables influencing decisions.